Come see us on tour. We're going to be in Bakersfield, San Jose, California, Buffalo, New York, Toledo, Montreal, Toronto, Ottawa, Glasgow, Manchester, Belfast, Dublin, Liverpool, Birmingham, and London. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets. So you remember that helicopter that crashed into that American Airlines jet in D.C.? And remember they wouldn't release the name of the pilot, and they until they could scrub. Well, it turns out the pilot was a woman, and
I know where this is going.
100% pilot error. And Trump was saying, and Trump came out immediately and connected it with DEI, and the New York Times just wrote a story about it and talk about burying the lead. You want to see what they did? Alec Berenson caught this. He goes, the New York Times story on the January D.C. plane crash hides its takeaway until the last sentences. The takeaway, meaning the most important part of the show, about the story, they buried until the last. I wonder why they did that. The lady helicopter pilot ignored multiple warnings from her right seat about altitude, as he was directly telling her to turn away. Wow. So there was a male who was her instructor.
Stop.
And he was telling her what to do, and she kept ignoring his direction.
Oh.
And she flew straight into a passenger jet. You want to... By the way, I think the guys at the New York Times misunderstood their instructions, that a good reporter is supposed to do a lot of digging, but it's not supposed to be so you bury the story like a gangster in the Meadowlands. But that's what they did. Here's the headline: Missteps, equipment problems, and common but risky practice led to a fatal crash.
What was the practice?
The new details revealed by the Times show complex failures. Turns out it wasn't complex.
Did you have a dick? Maybe it is.
It was maybe. It was the pilot not listening to instructions.
Because he was mansplaining?
I guess he was mansplaining.
I thank God that the pilot wasn't Chinese, or else this would be racist as well as sexist, this story.
By the way, believe me, this is brought to you by the same people who told you the rise of heart problems after the vaccine was due to late night television watching.
Women told me that.
Women told me that, yeah.
So women said that.
So here's from the end of the article. The Black Hawk was 15 seconds away from crossing paths with a jet. The warrant officer, Eaves, then turned his attention to Captain Lobach. That's the pilot. He told her he believed that the air traffic control wanted them to turn left toward the East River bank. Turning left would have opened up more space between the helicopter and the American Airlines Flight 5342, which was heading for runway 33 at the altitude of 300 feet. Jesus. She did not turn left. Yes, there were other factors that allowed her to screw up and kill herself and almost 70 other people, but she was the one flying the Black Hawk, and she repeatedly ignored warnings. Of course, this is going to empower all the dumb guys who are saying, see, chicks just don't listen. But
well, Jimmy, I have questions. Has the coroner's report come back as to whether she was on her pyramid or not?
Shut up. The FAA mandated an altitude of no higher than 300 feet for that part of the route, meaning that an altitude of 400 feet would have been unacceptable and could have positioned the Black Hawk uncomfortably close to the departing and landing airplanes. By 8:44 p.m., it seemed to be in more of a appropriate spot. As the helicopter approached the Key Bridge, from which it would fly south along the river, Warrant Officer Eaves stated that it was at 300 feet and descending to 200 feet. Necessary because the maximum height for this route closer to the airport is supposed to be 200 feet. So they were at 300 feet, which is where the jet was. They were supposed to be at 200. But even as it reached the juncture, Warrant Officer Eaves evidently felt obligated to repeat his instruction. Hey, we're at 300 feet. You're supposed to be at 200. So he's telling her to turn left. He's telling her to get down to 200 feet. and you need to descend. Captain Lobach said she would. But 2.5 minutes later, the Black Hawk was still above 200 feet, a dangerously high level. So this is 100% pilot error.
It's kind of bizarre, actually. How often does this happen when someone just doesn't? I mean, of any gender of a pilot, like, okay, I will, then they just don't do it. Does that happen a lot? I don't think it does it?
You wouldn't think. Here's Gary Weiss says, true, the details are at the end of the story, but it is alluded to 11 paragraphs down into the article. They allude to the real reason the plane crashed, but it's 11 paragraphs in. Clearly, the cause of the crash was pilot error, and only pilot error. They buried the lead. Of course they did. Well, here's what he says. Not only the helicopter crew appeared to have made more than one mistake. Not only was the Black Hawk flying too high, but in the final seconds before the crash, its pilot failed to heed a directive from her co-pilot, an Army flight instructor to change course. So let's just go. I got one more. Remember when the story broke? This is from SEO for Deplorables. Says, remember when the story broke? They initially withheld the female pilot's name at the request of her family, which was highly unusual for accidents like this. Yes, it was. When they finally released her name, they called her the third soldier inside the Black Hawk helicopter. They didn't call her the pilot. Isn't this weird?
Wait a minute, what? She was piloting it? You know, I just saw a fake space launch where some chicks were just in like a bouncy castle, basically. They called them astronauts. But now she's the third.
Now she's the third. So number two, it was not until today, 3 months later, that I'm even hearing she was the pilot.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
I believe Captain Lobach's service and sacrifice should be honored. She was the pilot. I also believe that any media outlet that chooses to attack Pete Hegseth for even questioning the role of DEI on overall safety is committing malpractice and endangering the lives of more civilians and service members. Well, let's look at this. So here's how they Newsweek. Who was Rebecca Lobach, the third soldier named in DC Blackhawk crash? Who was Captain Rebecca Lobach, the third soldier? Army identifies third soldier. Yeah. U.S. Army pilot Rebecca 28 identified as third soldier. What we know about North Carolina soldier who died in D.C. helicopter plane crash. And at the bottom, it says D.C. plane crash. Army identifies third soldier. Isn't that weird? So this seems very weird. It seems like they were afraid of a DEI narrative coming out. And so they tried to bury the fact that it was a female pilot.
It sounds like Pat Tillman's story.
Yeah, of course.
Remember Pat Tillman? And
yeah.
They like, oh, it was just a waste of his life. And then, I mean, or the one chick they supposedly rescued, but then it came out, all this stuff. They do that all the time. This is military. So, of course.
Yeah.
And this is what, when Trump was coming in, right after he got in, I guess. And they got heat on him for their dumb DEI things in the military. Remember that commercial we laughed at?
Yes.
Well, I laughed. The cartoon.
So
yeah, this is the military censoring things for just like any other disaster.
So they wanted to cover up. So this was a cover up. This was a very poor, and then the New York Times is in on it. By the way, they bury the lead.
Yeah,
they allude to it at the 11th paragraph, and they don't tell you explicitly until the final paragraph. Isn't that amazing? They do the opposite of journalism. Even I know not to bury the lead.
It's not amazing at all. It would be amazing circa, like 2011 to me.
Yeah. So now you know the rest of the story. They were being attacked for their DEI programs, and I'm not saying this is the cause of this was a DEI program. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is they were afraid that this would reflect negatively, poorly on their DEI programs, and right. all the generals, who I've seen in testimony in front of Congress defend it, their DEI and all that other stuff.
Yeah, it makes no goddamn sense.
And so they
I
were.
consider this a Manchurian candidate.
She was such a great pilot, she flew her helicopter directly into a passenger jet.
Another friend, Sabrina Bell, said Lobach was meticulous in everything she did. She
Except
never did anything half-heartedly. She never did anything impulsively.
for that one thing. Man.
Yeah, I think that's like some program Manchurian candidate. That's so bizarre. But again, why are you covering up? Why don't you we're not going to get funding because we need a DEI. Half those asshole generals shouldn't even be in there. We got
I know
more generals than there are producers in Hollywood.
I know.
Now.
They're a little heavy on generals over at the Pentagon.
Yeah.
But of course the New York Times goes along with it. The New York Times is just another arm of the military-industrial complex. The New York Times. They lie about every war in my lifetime. They lied about Vietnam. They lied about Iraq twice. They lied about Syria. They lied about Libya. They lied about Afghanistan for 20 years. And they're currently lying to you about Gaza and Israel and Ukraine. And Ukraine.
Well, bottom line, this is what I found out recently. If it went to officer school, those are the people that still think Ukraine has been winning.
Yeah. Ha!
So that's programming. There ain't no other word for that.
Yeah.
That's pure programming.
Come see us on tour. We're going to be in Bakersfield, San Jose, California, Buffalo, New York, Toledo, Montreal, Toronto, Ottawa, Glasgow, Manchester, Belfast, Dublin, Liverpool, Birmingham, and London. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets.